So I wanted to make this video as a follow-up to my last video where I talked about a paper which was kind of stretching some evidence and making very broad claims which they didn't have the proper data to back up, and that led to a New York Post article picking that up and kind of fear-mongering a little bit, creating some uncertainty. So what I wanted to talk about in this video are the fundamentals of evidence. So how do you make a very solid argument with proof and validity? And I think, most of the audience, I presume, aren't professional scientists or just want to get a picture of an analytical mindset. How do you be more analytical? How do you produce things with more validity? And I hope with this video you will find out how to certify claims with higher degrees of certainty that can stand up to skepticism. So, oh, PowerPoint's not working. Uh-oh. Okay. So the scientific method is at the pinnacle of reasoning. You usually start out with a scientific question, which is different from the layman's question, which is, just a sentence with a question mark. It asks, what's going on here, for instance. A scientific question sort of is it's more predicated off of reality. You're questioning some sort of a quanta, some phenomenon is going on, and you want to conduct a objective examination of that quanta. So I realize my vocabulary is kind of egregious at times, but two camps of reasoning you can fall into. Reasoning is sort of this philosophical deduction about how you come to a conclusion. And there's two broad types. There's a third type, but I'm not going to get into that. These are the two types of reasoning schemes that people are familiar with. You have deductive reasoning, which is your Sherlock Holmes style. You have a hypothesis, and you look, you examine the evidence objectively. You could get into some concession and refutation, or you look what peers have to say, or you even perform primary data analysis and extract data from your own experiments or own digging in archives. It doesn't have to be scientific. All the people in the humanities can probably appreciate going in textbooks or just extracting information, evaluating it, and analyzing it. And at the end, you ask yourself, okay, was my hypothesis right or wrong? A hypothesis is usually predicated off of past conclusions. And then we have inductive reasoning, where instead of having a hypothesis from the beginning, you look at all the evidence and evaluate it and look for patterns or trends, and then you form a hypothesis from all of these conclusions from the data. So it's a data-driven hypothesis. And the real difference comes down to in the effect of bias. Now, bias is a deviation inherent in your reasoning, which can bring you to a wrong conclusion. So if we talk about the cons of deductive reasoning, we can say that if you form a hypothesis off of biased or incorrect data, and then you look at the data associated with those conclusions, your bias can become more fortified and further ingrained, rather than falsifying it. So it's not an inherently corrective scheme of reasoning. Don't get me wrong, it is still employed today, and it is good, but it has to be done objectively. The validity of the sources has to be evaluated. Are the sources you're extracting information from objective? Are you being sucked into an echo chamber? Um, if you're doing political analysis, for instance, you should consider information produced from both sides of the political aisle and really get into as many diverse perspectives, even those contrary from your own, to get the whole picture. If you want the best kind of analysis, the con for inductive reasoning is they can produce false or biased conclusions if the examination is not holistic. For instance, if your data set is biased, it leans towards a certain way, then you're not going to be able to see the whole picture. You're only forming conclusions off of a sliver of the data. So we'll get into some examples now. So here's an example of deductive reasoning bias. My hypothesis is that the sun sets at 8 p.m., and I'm going to prove this. So I collect data over 2 weeks in July. So we see that this is a histogram plot, and we can see that in the 2 weeks of data, about the first week, the sunset is between 8 and 8:03, and the second week it is between 8:03 and 8:06. So the sun always sets around 8 p.m. So how is this biased? If we go back to our definition, we formed a hypothesis, so the sun sets at 8 p.m. This could be predicated, in the summer, the sun sets later, so the sun's probably going to set at 8 or 9 o'clock, even in the summer. So, let's test that. Over 2 weeks in July, we found that it did indeed set at 8 p.m. over those 2 weeks. However, the conclusion is wrong. The sun always sets around 8 p.m. We all know that in the winter, if you're in the northern hemisphere, I don't know how it goes down in the southern hemisphere, but the sun does not always set around 8 p.m. It changes. That the conclusion is incorrect, and it was produced from a biased data set from 2 weeks in July. If you want to produce a more holistic conclusion about when the sun sets, you want to sample every month, keep a track over a year for even, and you would see, the change in when the sun sets. And if you did assay the entire year of when the sun sets, then your conclusion would be the sun setting is variable. So what I wanted to impress upon you with this example is that, again, if you're not looking at the whole picture and your conclusion is not from the whole picture, it's reinforcing the same bias, and you come to the wrong conclusion. So let's look at inductive reasoning bias. So again, we're just going to start with evaluating the data. So these are some grocery store sales from some random grocery store that I made up. And if we look at this pie chart, a lot of the sales are vegetables, grains, and oils. Oh, so the community is mostly vegan. No one is eating meat except for this small sliver here. However, we're not thinking about the whole picture. This data was extracted biasedly. The data was collected every Friday during Lent in a predominantly Catholic community. So It's Lent. You're not allowed to eat meat on Friday. No one's buying meat on Friday, except for presumably the small sliver of the population that is not of that faith, which is this little green bar, um, presumably. But again, the biased data created the wrong conclusion. The community is not mostly vegan just by this metric alone. What you would have to do is either sample throughout the week or different times of year, different store patterns, even different holidays or traditions, or even different groups. It's just very important to pay attention to the quality of your data, as I iterated in the previous video. So I want to propose a thought question for you. Now, pause the video and try this exercise. Identify the color below with as high certainty as possible. So I'll give you a minute to pause, take like a piece of paper and try to write out as succinctly and with as high certainty as possible what this color is. So now what I'm going to do in the rest of this video is talk about the different degrees of proving certainty, to have certainty in conclusion. So we start with an elementary response. I said this would be kind of like a 5-year-old response. You ask some kid, what color is this? And they'll say, the color is orange because the color is orange. Although the response is correct, I presume most of us would say that this color is in fact orange. It doesn't convey a large amount of confidence to increase the validity of the statement. It's using a logical fallacy, so circular reasoning. You have to pay attention to this. It's pretty popular in the political sphere where people will use logical fallacies to justify their arguments, like ad hominem, making fun of someone's character for an argument. They're just not very logically sound. I would encourage you to just Google logical fallacy and just, no one on the street's going to say, oh, stop using the straw man fallacy. It's not a colloquial term. However, in the professional sphere, if you have to push an argument forward, like if your boss asks you, what product should we move forward with to increase revenue, you shouldn't say this product because this product is good. For instance, you need to portray a certain amount of data. You need to add some oomph to your argument to validify your statement. Like, this could be a quote from some of the most renowned. Einstein could have said this. It's like, just because Einstein said it does not mean that it's true. So that's the elementary response. So we move up in a level. We have a juvenile response. The color is orange because out of all the colors of the rainbow, it most closely resembles orange. I thought this would be kind of like a high schooler response. So they did provide a source, the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, and the color orange in the rainbow matches this. So, okay, we have a match. And the response correctly identifies the color and provides a simple rationale, but it's not specific. There's still no authenticity to the statement. There's no backing. The argument doesn't have a bite. For instance, some people would say, yeah, but it could just be very odd red, shifting in hue, for instance, or a pale red, for instance, or I don't know, something like that. Or they could say, oh, it could be sunset orange, not just orange, different gradations of orange. In fact, if you look at these pictures, these oranges Yeah, they're the same color, but not exactly. There's different. This orange is a little bit redder than this orange. So, yes, the argument is correcting a very wide sense. However, if we get into specifics, it kind of falls apart. A simple comparison is intuitive. Yes, if you're trying to reach a larger audience with your if you're very into a niche and you're trying to reach a wider audience, people will make simple comparisons because they're intuitive, but they're not inherently analytical. There's no analysis behind this. Yes, two things look alike does not mean that they are the same. It's a false equivalency. The statement is still inherently subjective. There's no data to prove this. Just pointing at two random things and saying that they are the same is subjective. It's not an argument. It's not evidence. And you should pay attention to this. Whenever someone is making a very shallow argument, they'll do that. So if I can impress upon you, do not listen to them. So we'll get into an adept response. So the color is a shade of orange because its color most likely resides within the spectrum of red to yellow. So this is arguing that this color is between here and here. Okay, that's pretty good. This response provides a classification of this color and it gives you an interval for error. Okay, so it resides somewhere in here of what we would presume would be orange. Because it's a gradation, there's no real point that you can cut and say this is 100% orange or this is 100% not orange. It's a gradation. It's the argument. The argumentor is giving themselves a margin of error. So the wider margin of error that you give yourself, the less you can be considered wrong, for instance. You'll see this a lot in academic circles. You're not supposed to speak with 100% certainty. You should have some nuance, unless something is so infallible, then you can use that. For instance, the language for this deductive reasoning bias, the sun always sets around 8 p.m. The word always makes it wrong. However, the sun sometimes sets around 8 p.m. Then that would make the conclusion true. So the precision of this answer is congruent between the two sources, but the validity is not assessed. So there's still not enough information to really decipher if this is orange. Yes, I mean they could fall within this range, but is this like red orange, yellow orange? It's just orange. It's very broad. They're they're casting a very wide net. I mean, yes, you can cast a wide net, but we want certainty. We want an accurate response. Like it it should come back to have a certain reliability factor. I mean, if we're going to break down the example, okay, orange. Who cares about choosing colors? But if you have higher stakes than picking a color, then you want to have a smaller margin of error in your answer. So to do that, we need to become more analytical. The answer does not analyze the sources, and the true classifications is not achieved. A classification is a categorical variable. It's a category. So all of these texts here are considered categories. So yes, this color could fit within the orange category or the red orange category. It's kind of dubious. But is this chart here an accurate depiction of this, or these? Did someone make this up? Like where is indigo on this? I thought indigo was a color. So that's the adept response. We're moving up in validity though. The master response. The colors comprised of RGB LED intensity values interacting to create the desired color. Colloquially, that's a very hard word. Colloquially, I still didn't say it right. This color would be referred to as orange, though its distinctive hue and tone correspond to the RGB value of 255.99.3, which can be described by the hex color that. And it provides evidence, okay, on these RGB sliders to create this color. So presuming that this is an input and output, okay, this answer accurately answers the question, but it doesn't validate the findings. So this is only one analytical method to produce this color, and I presume we're not experts in color theory or whatever, but what needs to be impressed upon you, which is the whole point of this video, is to cross-validate that. How do you know the method that you use to produce this color is accurate? What if there's error in the method you're using? And different methods have different accuracies. They're like tools. Yes, any heavy object can be a hammer. However, if you're going to build a house, I presume most people would rather have a nice Estwing hammer instead of a brick, for instance. There's a certain tool for the job. And, it doesn't have to be an Estwing. It could be a carpentry axe, for instance, like they used to use in the 50s, or certain other brands of hammers. So what we want to find out is, can we use multiple validation methods to get the same outcome? If we can prove that this is orange with multiple methods, then that certifies our outcome, our conclusion. It's validatable. It's the highest form of validation that we can have. So in our expert response, this is all the same thing. However, according to the website where I literally Googled the color orange and got this from, the source of this color classifies this color as orange. And if you look at the RGB intensity, that the chromaticity analysis overlaps the RGB to create an orange hue in the right wavelength range of light. So it's orange with a red hue, or is it red with an orange hue? I don't know. That's getting down to semantics now. But what this does, what I was talking about, it uses multiple methods of validation. So the source and the slider method and the wavelength method, they all overlap and have the same output. They all say it's orange, for instance. So now we can have a high degree of confidence and say that this is orange because we use multiple methods, multiple approaches, and multiple techniques to produce this. So with a very high degree of certainty, you can say that this color is orange. So what do we get from this? We have ways to evaluate our accuracy or our outcomes. So whenever we think about our claims, we want to think about how accurate they are, which is basically how right are we versus um, it, if we have this is precision. We want to consider the grouping of our methods. So if we look at this target here, I'm kind of stuttering a little bit, but we want to shoot towards the bullseye. So if we have high accuracy, we're shooting towards the bullseye in the middle. And high precision is the grouping of this. So high precision has tight grouping. So this is the best outcome right here. And if you look at the worst outcome, you barely hit the bullseye and your grouping is all over the place. And this is it's kind of a route people fall down into if they have bias in their reasoning. They'll have low accuracy, but if all of their methods are predicated on bias, it will contort the outcome so that, yes, all of their methods do come to the same conclusion as I showed in this slide, but they're still wrong. They're not hitting the bullseye. They're inaccurate. Or you could have high accuracy and low precision, where none of your methods come to the same conclusion, and that's a whole different animal. You have to do troubleshooting in that. But the point of this is to impress upon you that there's multiple dimensions of looking at data and doing analysis. You need to be very thorough and confident in your methods that they actually show what they claim to show. And another thing is the practicality of doing this kind of analysis. There's a cost benefit. Yes, the benefit is that you're right, but the cost is that you have to put a lot of time and research into producing this data. So, and that will come down to how much does it cost being right. You know, if there's money on the line, for instance, you're putting money on the stock market, there's a very, very high cost. So there's a very, very high necessity to be right, for instance. So you need to consider the purpose of why you're conducting analysis. Why are you arguing? What are the stakes, for instance? And the last point here I have is that these are the kind of paradigms where how you evaluate truth, for instance. So this is called a confusion matrix, which shows all the possible outcomes of making a prediction. However, in this case, it kind of puts together a thought process. So the predicted is you, the individual, doing your analysis over a problem, and the actual is, in the grand theory of things, are you actually right? So you say, okay, this is orange, and in reality, it's orange, so it is truly orange. Or you say, this is not green. Actually, this color is not green, so that would be truly negative. It's not green. However, you can have a false negative error if you say that this is not orange. However, it actually is orange. So that it's a false prediction. You came to the wrong conclusion. Or you could say that this is orange, but actually it's not orange, a false positive. So these are just kind of different paradigms of how your thought process can be, I guess, deviating from what is truth. And all of these points here are just for a consideration of what do I need to do to have accuracy and precision at the lowest cost? And what is the scope? What are the stakes? And there's infinite examples of that, but the main takeaway of this should be that in order to be thorough, you need to cross-validate your claim with multiple methods of a high degree of specificity for what you're trying to show. You can't compare apples to oranges, for instances. You have to compare apples with other apples. And that's it.